Okay, George, do you want me to, do you want to share your screen once you start talking?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's ideal
okay,
because I
I'm
think the
not,
slides I sent you didn't have the best formatting.
that's fine.
That PowerPoint export on Macs does not work great.
Yeah, well, that's okay. Not a big deal. All right, we're gonna just wait. I would just mention, I know that more people registered than are here. So I just want to wait maybe a couple minutes for everybody else to join us.
At least more to join us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's always going to be some no-shows. So, yeah, I see that 19 people registered. I'm not going to wait for 19 people because, again, there may be some no-shows, but we'll. Hello there.
How's everybody going?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Is Laura going to meet us?
Unfortunately, no, she's not here. She had a death in the family, so she's unable to be here today.
Oh, done.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Play some piano for us, Eddie?
And the last time I tried that, it didn't work too well. So
Okay.
gonna skip that.
Glad we're starting late. I got, I had time to get coffee.
That's okay. Good. Now what happened? We lost somebody. Did we lose somebody?
Yes, Stuart.
Yeah, what happened? He dropped out.
He may come back.
Okay.
I'm not in a jail cell. I'm in my office.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, 2 years ago they moved our team into a building at Rutgers that with concrete, cinder block walls, which is not the most aesthetically appealing, but you know,
Good thing is we only have to be here one day a week.
right, right. How are you all working remotely, all of you, or?
Yeah, I'm still working from home.
Okay.
Hasn't changed for me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we up until a year and a half ago, we were coming into the office every day up at Rutgers, but since March 2020, starting in March 2020, we worked from home all the time, and then only this past July we started coming in one day a week.
Oh, Stuart is at the cabin. Oh, nice.
All right. I guess I'll start in a minute. I know we have more people registered, but hopefully people can pick up.
Yeah, I had to register twice.
Yeah, I apologize. I took over hosting this for Laura, and I didn't realize that all the registrants needed to be approved. So I apologize for.
No problem.
Hopefully everybody knows by now.
Yeah, I got. I was wondering.
Okay. All right. Well, okay, I guess we'll get started. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the September meeting of the Joomla User Group of New Jersey. My name is Eddie Konzel. I work at Rutgers University with your regular host, Laura Gordon. Unfortunately, Laura can't be here today due to a death in the family, so I'm filling in for her. Our guest speaker today is George Wilson. George is a DevOps engineer, a software engineer, and an open source enthusiast from London. He currently works as a senior consultant engineer at Automation Logic. George builds Joomla extensions and does bug fixes and features for the Joomla CMS and also the Joomla framework. And with that, I will now turn the presentation over to George. George, welcome.
Thank you. Hey guys, let's see if we can share this. So.
Yep.
Amazing. Cool. Okay, so hopefully today's going to be a relatively short one because mainly I just want to give you guys the ability to ask questions and kind of get the insights that you guys want to get out of this. This isn't a conference talk or anything, so feel free to butt in, ask questions, however you guys want to organize yourselves. Yeah, it's not a lecture. So today I'm going to be talking web services in J4. So kind of looking a little bit about kind of the structure, the layout, what we've got, how to drop things into your own websites, and kind of roughly where I see the future going. So you kind of already did the introduction for me, so I won't dwell on this, but yeah, senior consultant engineer for automation logic. So we do DevOps and stuff in various different places. At the moment, I've been working in the government department for a while, building automation and all that sort of thing. And in my free time, obviously lots of Joomla. Been on the Joomla production team, release leads of various things, including 4.0, deputy release leads, all that kind of fun stuff. So if you guys do want to grab me, these are my contact details. Feel free to grab me on GitHub. Emails, I might be a bit slower to reply to, but I do go through them normally a couple of times a week. But yeah, feel free to ask. And obviously, you guys are all here, so also feel free to ask. In terms of where web services fit in, and I'm going to kind of interchange in my slide deck, unfortunately, between web services and API, depending on how I felt on the day I wrote the slide. In Joomla4, we had this kind of two application concept and kind of hinted at this idea of a third, where we had the site and the administrator, and then we kind of had a loose concept of CLI scripts, where we kind of had, you could build like build CLI scripts where you basically had to build yourself a full application instance. In Joomla4, we kind of expanded this a bit. So alongside site and administrator as first-class citizens, there's now CLIs and APIs. CLIs is a full different discussion, but basically there is now one single CLI application and you build commands into that structure. And APIs is the complete new kid on the town. And that's what we're going to talk about today in terms of web services. And so, yeah, so this is as kind of fundamental, let's say, from a Joomla perspective, as say site administrator was back in Joomla2 or Joomla3 or before. But I guess the first kind of thing, just to so everyone's on the same page, is kind of like, what is a web service? And a lot of people give you a lot of different answers to this. So I'm going to say it's really hard to define, but basically it's something where you'll make it's a way for people to make requests between two devices in a let's say in a way that machines will understand. I think that's the best way of describing it, is something that machines can use to talk to each other. When you've got websites and stuff, obviously these are in HTML and machines can parse it. You know, Google famously makes huge amounts of money by doing that, but it's not an optimized thing. It's not something that's fast, and it's not fast, and it's not pretty, and it will take you time, and every website's different, obviously. Although to be fair, a web service is different. But even within, but the reason that it's really hard to pinpoint this down is there's so many different types of web services with so many different purposes. It makes it pretty tricky. 1 second, I'm just gonna turn on the light. Getting dark. Okay, that's better. So there are lots of different types of APIs, and again, fairly arbitrary groupings, but there are ways that people have kind of started to group up APIs in a way that kind of tries to make more sense and kind of building blocks, let's say. So obviously lots of different use cases, lots of different business requirements. And I think business requirements is the key thing here. It's about, what is the driving block for your API? Because if you don't understand why your business needs an API, you're not going to build a good API. But largely speaking, there are kind of three different categories. There's like a public API. So that's something that you're effectively making available to anybody on the internet. That doesn't mean to say it necessarily doesn't require registration. It may require a login, but anybody can log in and start to use your API. So a lot of Google's APIs are like that, Facebook's APIs, Twitter's APIs, all these sorts of things are examples of APIs where maybe we'll sign up, maybe not, but you can query something and get instant results back. Then there's private APIs. Private APIs, this kind of murky gray area where some people believe in them and some people just classify them the same as other things. But a private API, in my view, is it's still a public API in that people outside your organization may use it, but it becomes significantly more restricted. You might have to manually approve every single person that does it. So maybe you open up, you have a relationship with another business that's just directly with them, and they will start to interact with your business using the API that you provide to them. Only they can use it, only they will ever use it, but it's still something that, if you decide to change it, you've got to inform them and let them update their code in advance. Finally, there's internal APIs. This is basically what you're going to use for any internal communications within your website. So maybe that's between your mobile app and your website or anything like that. Basically anything that you want to build an API for that you're not going to expose to anybody outside of your own business. Therefore, you kind of can develop it freely without having to worry about the impact on other people. And it's the latter of these that Joomla kind of is starting to offer out the box, in that we don't know what you want to expose to other people. Joomla can't know like which bits say that you don't use tags in whenever you create an article, or you will put everything into the uncategorized category, so you don't want to expose that. The only thing Joomla can do out the box is to show everybody all the data, and then you're going to be responsible, if you want to expose that to other people, for thinning out the data that you're not using and putting them in a sense that will make contextual sense to them as a user of your API. So it doesn't mean to say that Joomla can't be made to work as a public API, but out the box, Joomla cannot build your public API because it cannot know what to expose and what not to expose. This table here I thought was a particularly nice kind of breakdown of how people saw data in terms of public APIs. They called their partner APIs instead of private APIs, but I think it has largely the same purpose in my view, and internal APIs or private APIs. So moving on. So like I said, we can't predict what features of Joomla you're using, and so if you start to build these apps out, then you've got to, and you're going to build it in a way that any client can see your data. You've got to make sure that you're not exposing data you don't want to see. And even if that's in an internal API, you've got to be careful. Could people see this data? For example, if you're building, let's say a mobile app, where people aren't going to directly see your API requests, you've still got to decide that, if people intercept this data, because people can read, the request data going through, although generally with HTTPS sites, it's less of an issue these days, but you've got to assume that people can packet sniff and view these requests. And do you care? Is there any extra data you're sending out that you don't care about? Famously, Tinder got caught out by this one. They started opening up some of their APIs a few years ago. For those, I'm sure probably most people know, but Tinder's a dating app. And one of the things obviously is you put in your location. And what they used to do is they'd send out your pretty much exact location on the app. And then the app would hash it and say, within 5 kilometers of whatever. And then one day they opened up their app and they were sending out the exact coordinates of your location to everyone, it turned out, and then just hashing it on the device, which was pretty bad for the privacy of everybody using Tinder, who then suddenly got the exact latitude and longitude coordinates of everybody using the app. And this is why you have to be very careful about what you expose, and always look at, do I care if someone gets hold of this data, even if it's supposed to be for internal use only? Because one day, either you might make it public in the case that Tinder did, or maybe it is just actually sensitive in some way if you send out all this information. So again, though, having said all of that, Joomla still provides you the backbone to add your own custom endpoints. The stuff that Joomla provides out of the box exposes basically everything to your select group of users, but you can add custom endpoints and choose what data is returned in that with your own code. And I will also add at this point that, as a reminder, an API isn't just about exposing an API. You have to be aware that by providing a way for machines to access data and access your site, you are providing a way for machines to access your data and access your site. That means you have to be much more careful about things like DDoS attacks, making sure that your API is fully secure and authenticated against in all your endpoints in ways that you trust, because once you let the machines in, the machines are in. So a lot of people build things like API gateways, which says WSO2, Kong, et cetera, Most public cloud providers these days, the AWSs, the Google Clouds, the Azures, all have their own API gateways built into their platforms as well. Not everybody will need an API gateway, but you need to consider it, whether you need it for your use case. But I'm not going to touch too much more about API gateways for the rest of this, because I don't think it's super important for this discussion about what Joomla is providing. So I wanted to touch on a little bit about what actually, like, the levels of things you get in an API. And I've unashamedly stolen this from the Martin Fowler website, who is kind of like the guru of a lot of things in tech. Because I think he does it in a much better way than I will ever be able to do if I try and build my own examples out of the box. So what is this richness and maturity model? Well, basically, your starting point for a web service is pretty much what you get on the website. And he uses the example of booking appointments with a doctor. So we'll use the same thing. So when you were booking an appointment with a doctor, you might try and go onto a website, and you're going to send some post requests. You're going to look for open slots and then book an appointment. So you'll be getting data using a GET request to get all the information, and then you'll be posting data back. So you where you kind of want to get more information. So you're going to send a post request to say, give me some slot information. It'll send you the results of that back. The web server will send you that results back. Then you'll say, I want this appointment request, and they'll send that off. And this is pretty much how a website would work now. You can completely imagine that you've got some JavaScript powering this. So like when we start to move up to level 2 of the maturity model, we need to start improving things. So we start to add identifiers into our URLs and for our appointments. So let's say for getting the information on a doctor, we might send a request to doctors/doctor ID, in his example, M Jones. And when you get a list of slots back, you'll have a unique identifier associated with each slot. So, and then when you want to actually book that appointment request, you can reference that identifier. In Joomla's case, this would be all your IDs associated with an article or something like that. And this will help you when you start to debug your API, because in your Nginx requests and stuff, you'll see exactly what things people are requesting and what requests fail. Do certain endpoints fail more than others? Do certain endpoints give timeouts? Do certain endpoints take much longer than you'd expect? These are all things that come out of having useful endpoint names. Because these are because generally you're never going to log the body data because it's sensitive, but you can log your request URL. But yeah, we still haven't changed our body much. So now let's introduce the concept of full HTTP verbs. So in HTTP, although in the browser, you're only going to use get and post, obviously there are also puts and patch and head requests. All of these are required if you're going to implement a fully RESTful web service. So now when we send our request off, we're going to send filter options as query parameters in our get URL. And we'll also return with status headers to represent what actually happened on the server. So we know that 200 means okay, so it's got all your data. 201 is created. 500s would be something went wrong on the server side. 400s could be you've sent bad data. Like these groupings start to give like generic ways before you've even looked at what the response is to know if things have gone wrong, and if things haven't gone wrong, why haven't they gone wrong? And if you look at how some people build API clients, they'll start to look at specific responses in the API, but they also might well build up, especially for errors, generic responses. So if they get some sort of 400 response back, which means bad data effectively, or bad user input of some form, which is where 404 of course comes from in that grouping for bad URL. If people start to get this sort of data back, then they can say, oh, there's something went wrong with your input, even if they don't know specifically what, because something deeper went wrong. Anyway, and finally, the final stage when we move into the kind of full world of REST links is you start to improve the responses. So you send back effectively URLs for related resources. So before, when we got our list of slots, I don't know how well this comes up on the screens for you guys, but basically when we send back a list of slots, we would say, who's the doctor, what's the start time, what's the end time, and what's the slot ID, so that we could get this information back. But rather than just send back, here's the slot ID, how about so that it's even easier to progress, we say, not just here's the slot ID, but here is the link to book this slot. So that if you start to change your web services in the future, not only can you say effectively, here's just a slot ID, and then you've got to know that the next URL is the book appointment, and you've got to specify that ID. You can swap that URL over, and you can say, actually, here's the URL. You guys can just call this immediately, and if we change it in the future, you've got to be using this property. And this works well when you've got flows of API requests. Obviously, for just one-off requests, it doesn't always make as much sense, although sometimes it can do. Even for a Joomla article, you can imagine a series of links of, this is the link to update the article, this is the link to get more information about the author of the article, etc., etc. But these kind of concepts, when you can even change your URLs and the machines adapt, and you don't have to change a line of code in your API client. And these things are called very catchily Hateos, which I'm sure comes off the tip of the tongue nicely, which stands for hypertext is the engine of application state. But basically it means that you have something where effectively machines can fully navigate your site almost from a single entry point. So yeah, this is a slightly zoomed in version. So key things are HTTP response code of 201, link rails. So you can see here, even when we've sent the request off to create an appointment, we then get links back to cancel an appointment, add tests, change times, update contact information of the patient, all these sorts of things, which could be useful when you are booking your appointment. So I guess you can see kind of what this kind of gold state looks like. And having talked about machines a lot, I guess the other thing is that the key thing about an API is consistency across endpoints. So you've got to make sure that when someone's calling an API request, that roughly your data is, of course, there's going to be some stuff that is dependent on exactly what you're turning back to the user. But generally speaking, that if you always have a author of a blog post, of a contact, of a web link, that always comes back in an author property. There's always the same structure URL to get more information about that user, all these sorts of things. You want consistency as the gold world across an API. And so when we started building this API application up, which was 2016, 2017, maybe, there was a series of GSOC projects we did over a few years. We built up an API specification first, and we will always keep this updated to reflect the latest version of what we consider Joomla's API specification to be. And this also will help people as they implement APIs in their own components to try and make sure that their APIs look as much like core APIs as possible. All of Joomla's core components are compliant with this Richardson maturity level 3, this kind of maturity model of stages that we discussed before. So that's the highest level. We return all the information in a fixed format. We follow the JSON API standards. But obviously there's lots of different ways to get there with various related links and all these sorts of things. If you want to look at various decision-making requests on why we implemented the various bits of the APIs in Joomla core the way we did, I encourage you to go look at the GSOC links. There is a series of docs on GitHub. That's my last link in my slide there, which, for example, that link compares the different JSON API frameworks and shows why we picked JSON API as a framework as opposed to various other things that are available. There's also stuff comparing how we set out our routes and various other things. So if you're interested in exactly why we made the decisions we made, I encourage you to go have a look there. So I think that's kind of enough theory, let's say. And I thought we'd kind of look at some more practical things. So kind of how to set up APIs in Joomla. So if you set up a Joomla4 install and populate it with some data, I'm saying blog sample data if you need some test data just to get started, but obviously, feel free to put your own data in, update a dummy site, update a real site if you're feeling very brave. Although obviously always take a backup first. I caveat that in everything. And you'll need yourself a super admin account for now. And if you edit your user account, you'll find that there is a tab called Joomla API token, which you can see on the far right there, and save your profile if you don't already have a token there. That will generate you a new token and you'll be able to copy that, and that will be your authentication token for all requests. Obviously, this token can be deactivated at any time if you want to, and you can also reset it if you want to if you feel that your token is being compromised. This is the same thing as your password. Do not give it to anybody, etc., etc., etc. API authentication is a plugin group. This is just what Joomla is choosing to ship out of the box. It is not a JWT. It is not an OAuth implementation. It is a simple cryptographically secure token generated that is unique for an individual user account. If you need enterprise level things like OAuth authentication, I am absolutely sure that this stuff is going to come on the JED in time, but it doesn't exist out of the box in Joomla on day one. We wanted something that was easy for users to get started with, but was still cryptographically secure. So obviously not basic auth or anything like that, but yeah, the API token is our compromise on something fairly secure out of the box. Yeah. So the other thing you're going to need is an API client. I particularly have used Postman for many, many years before I was using APIs within Joomla or was developing the API for Joomla. But alternatives do exist, such as Insomnia and various others. There's also enterprise offerings if you don't want free versions for whatever reason, or your enterprise uses one. But yeah, Postman is going to be what we can use in our example here. And to get started with, we'll do some basic setup. So create a collection, give it a name. In my case, I called it content components. I've edited it and put in the authorization section, I've selected bearer token in the drop-down box of type and pasted in that token that I was just showing you on the previous slide. And I've also set up a variable in the variables tab, which holds my base Joomla URL. And I do this just so I can swap between different websites. Obviously, this bit's not required if you're always going to be curling, if you're always going to be making API requests against a fixed site. But it just allows me to swap between my local setups easily, because I can just change the variable and all my API URLs will update. There is a full list of core APIs available on that docs page. Feel free to go search for them. But I just thought, as an example, I would give an example of curling for an article. So you can see that we curl the URL api/index.php/v1, which is the version of the API. Because APIs are versioned the same way the CMS is. If you make a major version of a break in your API, you should implement a major version to reflect that. And often people will have deprecation policies and stuff like that on their APIs as well in the real world. And then content articles 1. So content/articles is obviously our content type for Joomla. So we're getting the articles out of the content component, and ID number article 1. The only other thing that's worth mentioning if you're doing something like this is to make sure for each endpoint you have an accept header with value application/vnd.api+json. This specifies that you want the JSON API format back. This is the default if you don't specify it, but Joomla is programmed in a way that we can support other endpoint requests in the future if we decide that there is whatever need, maybe whatever JSON API dies and something else becomes a standard or whatever have you. There is code to do content type detection and to send in the right headers. Sorry, had a cold recently, so I'm coughing away at the end results of it. There is a Postman collection that's supported by Alexandra. Alexandre Elise. He's built something a while back that allows you to, that basically out of the box ships with all the core APIs that he's keeping updated as well. So if you don't want to build all this stuff yourself, you can download that and import that into Postman as well. In terms of adding API support, I can show some demos of this later, by the way. So I'm just going to get through my slide deck first so I can open myself to questions. If you want to go back and look at some of the examples in the real Postman client, I'm more than happy to do so. But beyond just kind of showing an example of a core endpoint, I'll quickly cover kind of adding API support into your components. So routing in, for the web services is completely based on plugins and directs you into your component like you would from a normal router within Joomla. So you can either add individual routes, or you can, if you are doing simple CRUD routes, which stands for create, read, update, and delete. So things like articles, contacts, all these sorts of things in Joomla where you basically just want the ability to create, update, and get articles and delete them. You can set up those by default. They will hook into your component, and you basically have an extra section of your component like you have already for administrator and site. You can have the same thing for API. You can have an API section of your component too. It's still a completely traditional Joomla MVC structure. The only difference is the error handling is treated slightly differently, because not only do we need to hand back error text users, but we now also need to hand back a HTTP status code to reflect why things failed. Something that exceptions get up really well for. Sorry. And I encourage you guys, if you're interested in this, to have a look at how content is built. Or if you want a pure third-party extension, have a look at a Kiba release system, which is Nick has open source and has an API implementation within it using core MVC and all the rest of it. So yeah, if you're interested, go have a look. there is also an official docs page on how to do this as well, which is also in my slides. So again, if this is all documented officially, if you're interested, please do go have a look and come back if you have issues. So I kind of said that Joomla doesn't do, basically only does an internal API out of the box because we don't know what you're using. But obviously, people are going to want to know how to build private or public APIs. And the way to do this is basically going to be, for day one at least, build yourself a plugin to implement the routing and a component which will be able to go and fetch your data. So that basically means register your routes, send them off to your component, and then your component can either interact with a known Joomla4 component if you're trying to get it out of a third-party extension you're already using, or or basically it can go and get its own data if it's a component you know and trust yourself. It's pretty much as simple as that. Especially with the way that we've changed bits of the MVC layer in Joomla4, this should be fairly straightforward to do as well if you're interacting with other components. A lot of that side of things is massively improved in Joomla4. And I again encourage you to investigate looking at API gateways and see if it is appropriate for your use case, especially if you're exposing yourself to the public, rate limiting and that sort of thing for individual user accounts. You don't want people treating your website like a dev service and accidentally denial servicing the website out of existence. Seen it happen with too many websites over the years, even outside of Joomla. That's API permissions. The reason I said earlier that you need a super admin account, at the moment, web services is new to Joomla. We're allowing machines to do things. And we're opening basically a full new interface up in a way that's never been done before in Joomla. As a result, for day one operations with 4.0, we have restricted all web service access to be super admin only by default. That will be reduced over time as we gain confidence and users gain confidence, but it is just an element of everyone needs to gain trust in the system. You don't want us handing you, everyone who builds new websites with Joomla probably don't want APIs enabled for everybody out of the box anyway, especially when testing is still a relatively, I mean, it's been merged for 4 years now, but being real, not that many people test the release candidates outside of developers. And so until it's been put on a few more sites, we want to gain confidence in the system. I expect in 4.1 or 4.2, we will probably cut that. I could not tell you what to off the top of my head, but I suspect that's how it will end up going. We'll slowly start to wind it down. It won't ever be public out of the box for obvious reasons, or probably even registered, because you guys don't want web services being opened up without your knowledge. And certainly won't change anything on existing sites anyway, but the defaults for new sites may change in the future beyond the super admin default they are at the moment. But it is configurable in global configuration. So again, if you want to start doing with things, just make sure you turn that down first, because that is the access to all APIs within your website. It's effectively the same thing as allowing access to the site and the administrator login pages, which is also in global config. So one last slide, future of APIs in Joomla. With big caveats, this is my opinion. This does not reflect the views of production, etc., etc., etc. This is just how I see things going. I've already talked that I think we'll be reducing permissions required to access web services as a whole. As a result, I suspect we'll need to add in the ability to set permissions for on a per endpoint level, per API level, because obviously the permissions to get an article are probably different to the permissions to, I don't know, what's a good example? Get your global configuration data, let's say, or your global, or your user information for different users other than yourself. The usual things that we have permissions for in Joomla. Right now, we basically have a carte blanche thing of can you access the APIs or not. In the future, I'm sure that will change. In custom plugins already, though, there's no reason you can't add these requests in or these hooks in already. But in core, we don't have anything yet. I also suspect we'll start adding more APIs into core. Every component largely has one at this point. Com templates is an exception, but there aren't APIs, for example, for things like batch actions and that sort of thing yet. And that's the sort of thing I'm sure will be coming in over time as well. Mostly we've focused on the main kind of CRUD actions for all components, global config, installing extensions, all these sorts of things. And yeah, I also expect we'll see just an increased ecosystem in the JED, being able to generate kind of APIs in a more dynamic fashion. Redweb did something similar to this a long time ago, but for their own model. And various other people, I think Joomla have also done similar things. I suspect we'll start to see a big increase in extensions on JED that are using the hooks. We built it with lots of API, with lots of plugin hooks in a way that it should be customizable for people. And, you know, with the aim that we can get a good range of plugins around this. So I hope to see that coming. And like I said, I've tried to keep this relatively short, so kind of 30-ish minutes. So with that, I'm kind of going to end and open myself up for questions, can do demos, whatever you guys want. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, George. Yeah, so for as far as questions, you can either put them in the chat or unmute yourself. And why don't we do it this way? If you have a question, post it in the chat, or if you have the raise hand function, raise your hand and we'll unmute you so you can ask George directly. Does that work for you, George?
Yeah, of course, anything.
Okay, great. So let's see if we have anything in the chat. Not yet. Feel free to type questions into the chat. Let's see, do we have anybody raising their hand? You know, this is not something I work with a lot myself. Some of the members of our team are a little more hands-on with this type of programming interaction with Joomla, but it really looks fascinating. Obviously, this is going to open up a lot of new opportunities for us to do new and exciting things with Joomla through the APIs. Let's see. Okay, Olivier, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Hi, George. I was wondering, what is is there any advantage of using the API from a site onto your own site? I can see API calls being made from a site to a different one, or from an application to a website, but is there any advantage of doing it on your own website?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, if you think about what Joomla has with Media Manager in Joomla4, it's effectively a JavaScript application, right? That's actually built entirely on, it's not using Joomla's core web services because effectively for API authentication reasons, it's tricky. But effectively the API for this is pretty much exactly the same as what Joomla's official API will be giving you. So for kind of like day-to-day operations, it doesn't really make a huge difference either way. Like you can imagine that hitting submit on your update article request could just as easily go to an API as it could to your traditional backend create, you know, whatever update or whatever resource. But then you've got this additional flexibility that you can open it up to people in a specific way in the future. But it will make a big difference to these kind of more JavaScript heavy apps that people are using for specific things these days. You know, like Media Manager and stuff, where you kind of want to remove a lot of the click and drop style models and move to kind of more drag and drop style interfaces. APIs are very well suited to these JavaScript heavy applications. So if I kind of look at if I just navigate around a bit here, I have no clue if you guys can see us. I probably need to zoom a bit, right? And that does not apparently zoom this. There must be a way to zoom. I've never tried to present dev tools before. Is there a way? Anybody know?
I can see it pretty well, but I've got a, fairly decent sized monitor. I don't know if anybody else is having difficulty seeing it.
But if I just refresh this page and navigate around, you'll see that effectively at runtime, it's making API calls to go and get all the preview probably. It gets back all the directories and files and stuff to navigate around, so you can see the powered by logo, the Joomla Black sample data folder, headers folder, banners folder. And that's what allows us to do this all dynamically rather than the old Joomla4 way of having all the page, a page reloads every time you had clicked on a folder or opened an image and everything like that. So yeah, I mean, there are pages where it will make more sense. There are pages where you won't see much difference. Is the answer.
Okay, we have a question from Yannick. Hi, George. Have you considered making it easier for extensions to have their own API by allowing authorization through regular login process?
Can I say a word about that?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, George. Hi, all. Yeah, it's funny that you just mentioned that the media manager has the exact same problem that we had. And due to that, they are not using the Joomla API because what you explained before is perfect for, let's say, external access. And using a token, obviously, is a solution for that. But when you're building a single page application, or an extension as a single page application, as we switched to doing recently in our latest extensions, are all single page JavaScript applications, then using the regular Joomla login and authorization process and all of that is by far the easiest way to go. So I'm wondering if whether you've considered just adding another authorization plugin or something like that. That would just allow access to an API through the regular user access rights.
So the thing about that is you basically then have to have a store for all your authorization tokens, and you need a way to make sure they get timed out. I mean, it's not hugely different to sessions, but obviously with PHP, you've got built-in ways that PHP times out sessions, which you'd have to kind of force in for Joomla. If you're doing it for APIs, because you'll need some sort of secure JWTs or something like that. It becomes a lot harder. I mean, yes, I've considered it, but neither am I completely convinced it's something that core needs out the box at the same time.
I think it's more difficult because if I understand well the way it's built, I haven't looked deeply into it, but it's built as a separate application. So you don't have the same session. Is this what you're doing, or is it what you're saying? Or,
it's a completely separate application. But I mean, there is no session. An API by definition has to be sessionless. If you're building a REST API, there is never a session. Your session is limited to the request you're in. Nothing should be. If you have data that persists between API calls, then it's not a REST API anymore.
Yeah, I guess so. But it's the way we're doing it, just like Tech Joomla or others, I guess, is just using the cookies, and they are sent into the request, and you're logged in or you're not logged in, and all of that. So it's kind of REST, I guess, kind of a REST.
I mean, you can. Yeah, I mean, it works when you're developing your APIs, but generally it's. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that stops you. I mean, yeah, exactly, but it's not the most secure state. And your user still needs to log into a web UI somewhere, which also defeats the purposes of other types of APIs, right? At best, I don't think we would ever be able to have it enabled by default in core. for that reason.
Okay.
Um,
Well, the way we are doing it is we have we are staying within the regular, let's say, Joomla context, admin context or front end context, and it works. But it's just we had to do it separately, so that's the only thing.
I mean, you can add the cookie authentication back in, right? You can build yourself a web service cookie authentication plugin. But yeah, I mean, it's these things. They're not.
Don't you think? Do you think it would be nice for third-party extensions makers to have the ability to switch to a single-page application and use the Joomla built-in API system? Whether we rolled our own, it's okay, it's doable, but then everybody is going to do their own stuff. Like, so it's not.
Yeah, I get you. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, it's tricky. I mean, I wouldn't be against it. I mean, so I get to say this now because I'm not release lead anymore as well, which I am, but only of something that isn't accepting features anymore. You know, Benjamin's doing 4.1, Harold's doing 4.2, so I can say whatever I want now. That's not me who has to merge it.
Cool. Go ahead.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, I can see advantages, but I don't think. But like seriously, I could see core shipping with something like that for people who wanted to do SPAs, but I don't, if someone contributed it or whatever, but I wouldn't see it ever being enabled by default either. There would have to be the extension developers would still have to tell users that you need to enable this on your site as a prereq, I think.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Yeah, I'm sure if someone submitted that or did a pull request for that, then it would probably, I mean, I can't guarantee it will be accepted because like I'm not the release lead anymore for that sort of thing, but I'm sure I could talk to some people and yeah.
Okay, I'll try to think about it. Thanks.
Cool. Nice, thank you.
We have a question from Steve. Steve, do you want to ask your question? Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, or do you want me to just read it for you? Okay, Steve's muted, so I'll read his question. We might like to store articles in one central Joomla site, then share a subset of them and their custom field data out to other sites. Could we make use of the API to do this?
I think that was Michelle, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. It came through as,
it
it says from Steve Kujan to everyone.
For some reason, I'm Steve today.
She's-
I don't know what's going on.
You have an imposter,
I
Steve.
gave her the URL.
Yeah.
That's why. That's why you gave her the
All right.
URL. Okay.
Oh, whatever. We both want to know.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they work. Steve and Michelle are my coworkers, along with Laura at Rutgers. So, do you want to expound on your question, Michelle, or do you?
I think that kind of explains it. So yeah, we would say like news stories. We have all these different departments. We'd like to have the articles just in one site, and then other sites will just display, you know, their ones that are related to whatever the department is, something like that.
Yeah, this is totally fine. The custom fields are included in all the API responses. And you know, same, it will accept it and require it when you're making API requests. So yeah, absolutely, you can make the API do this.
Cool. That's what I was hoping.
No, it's a good use.
Okay. Do we have anybody else who either wants to raise your hands to ask a question or enter it in the chat? Let me see if I missed anything in the chat. Anybody else? Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to mention, George, that maybe you thought there wouldn't be time for?
Nothing particular. Just, yeah, I mean, if you guys make cool things or do cool things, do please share, because it'll be super fun to kind of, you know, show other people what the art of the possible is. Like, I use like a huge amount of APIs in my day-to-day work in the office and stuff, and kind of things that I do. So I guess I know a lot about what, you know, all these things that are possible. It'd be really cool to see what other people do.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, okay, here we go. Yannick, you've got another question. Do you want to ask? Do you want to unmute yourself and ask it?
Sure. Yeah, just a quick question. Is this documented? Can you share, like, especially
Yeah.
the routing, which is always puzzling me in some way. So yeah, I'm not. Yeah, looks. Yeah. Okay. Haven't seen that one. I looked it up, but adding routes. Okay. Yeah. Great. Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Okay. Well, we're coming up on 3 o'clock. I mean, we have time for maybe one or two more questions if anybody has anything. Let's see. Okay. Anything else you'd like to say, George? Oh, you're muted still. You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, super cool. Thank you.
Thanks for an excellent presentation. That was fascinating. It really, I think, is going to illuminate a lot of things here for those of us that want to make use of this new capability within Joomla. Okay, well, on behalf of Laura, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today. I know there is going to be another Joomla user group meeting in October. I don't have the information in front of me. Let me see if I could find it really quickly before we end today. Let's see. Okay, I know I should have this. Okay, the next meeting of the Joomla user group is going to be October 28th with Brian Tiemann. And the topic is Joomla Core Editor, do more with Core. And that will be Thursday, October 28th, the same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC. And let me just go ahead and share the URL to this in the chat. So you can all grab that URL. And that
He's
will
doing
be
a great job as moderator, I think.
Yeah, I'm a last minute replacement for Laura. So, you know, again, we send our best wishes to Laura. She had a death in the family, unfortunately. So, okay. Thank you all for coming. Thanks again, George, for the presentation. And we hope to see you all next month.
All right. See you then.
Thank you.
Have a nice
Bye.
day, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.